James Bianco is president and macro strategist at Bianco Research, which he established with the aim of originating insights unencumbered by traditional Wall Street research. His commentaries address such diverse subjects as monetary policy, the intersection of markets and politics, the role of government in the economy, fund flows, and positioning in financial markets.
Jim, you're nodding your head there. What are your comments about this fiscal replacement?
Yeah, I want to emphasize something that Dave said at the beginning. I normally consider myself, more of a libertarian-leaning person, and this time I was all for all of the stimulus or the government assistance that we did, and I've likened it to the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment, in the one where you have the right to remain silent. It also has in there too, if the government takes something from you, and the example everybody uses is they take your house to build a highway over it, they have to pay you for it. They can't just take things from you without nothing. Well, and it might be very well and good that they need to build the highway. Well, they took your job from you. They told you you couldn't go to work. They forced businesses to close. So in that instance, I do think that it was very necessary that we did what we've seen with the CARES Act and with the other stimulus acts as well too. Where I'm concerned is, where are we going to go with this? Right now, if you ask most people, what has been the result of the government stimulus? It's been to help the unemployed. It's been to help the poor. Now, maybe it hasn't been as efficient as we'd like it, but they're better off with it or without it. And it's led to helping the wealthy with higher asset prices as well too. So right now, everybody has won. There has been no loser in this game. So when Dave asked about universal basic income, of course, we're going to go right down that road. We're going to keep doing, we're going to do $2,000, whether it's next week or during the Biden administration. We're going to do more after that. And I fear we're going to just keep going and more and more and more until there is an adverse outcome. My thought of the adverse outcome is inflation. And that once we get it, then we'll start the pullback. But if the answer is, oh, we're going to do all these programs and everybody's going to benefit and the stock market's going to go up, and then we're just going to somewhere in 21 say, okay, that's enough and we're going to stop doing it. Nope, we're just going to keep going. And I think as we move forward into 21, until there is an adverse outcome, UBI, MMT are going to be even more discussed now than they've been discussed in the previous year or two.
Okay, so let me pick up on something that Ed mentioned too about the wealth effect, and not just asset prices on the stock market, but also the housing market. And so we look back to what the Fed was talking about prior to the pandemic. They were talking about more equality and sharing across the different income cohorts. But here we talk about wealth effects, and these are for asset owners. Even home prices are people who are owners, not renters. And so aren't we creating a more polarized kind of version of society through this creation of wealth effects? And so how are we trying to tackle that going forward? And maybe Danielle or Jim, you guys can talk about that, focusing on the Fed. And should this be part of their mandate? Again, they already have a dual mandate that's difficult to accomplish. Aren't we just trying to look to the Fed to answer all of our problems?
Yeah, just on your last part, at least they have some kind of an impact on the wealth effect where they have none on climate change whatsoever right now. But the bigger problem here is the Fed has defined the economy as asset wealth. You saw that back in March. When did the Fed finally start to react, and what was the reaction? It was to a falling stock market, and it was to aggressively intervening when the stock market was falling. And they pretty much defined the success of their programs as getting asset markets to go back up. And their argument was falling asset prices are going to depress the economy and increase unemployment, and rising asset prices are going to undo that. They're going to lower unemployment and they're going to pick up economic activity. Now, I would argue that that has demonstrably not been the case throughout the rest of 2020, but that's the way that the Fed has been operating right now, is that they've got an eye on asset prices, and that is kind of their North Star as to where they're going. Now, I know that they've tweaked their mandate and they're going to allow, inflation to run a little bit hot in order to get the unemployment rate down. Yesterday, Charlie Evans of the Chicago Fed said he could see the average inflation on core PCE going to 2.5% without the Fed moving policy. By the way, 2.5% would be a 28-year high in core inflation. It hasn't been above that level since 1993, basically, right now. The problem with all of this is what you saw in the fourth quarter of 2018. Jay Powell comes out on December 19th, 2018 and says, we're going to reduce the balance sheet by $60 billion a month. It's going to be an automatic pilot. It's going to be like watching paint dry. During that press conference, the S&P fell 3% while he was explaining that, and it kept going down, and eventually from top to bottom, the correction was 20%. That was December 19th. It's automatic pilot. It's going to be like watching paint dry. January 4th, after Powell got back from the Turks and Caicos, he goes out on a press conference, he gives a speech in Atlanta, the American Economic Association, and he says, we're going to be patient and flexible. In other words, the Fed spent months and months putting together a policy to reduce the balance sheet. The market had an adverse reaction. Within 2 weeks, that policy was in the trash can, and they went with a completely different one. When it comes to inflation, when it comes to the markets, if Charlie Evans says, look, we the Fed will tolerate 2.5% on core inflation without raising policy, it's not up to you. It's up to the markets. If we get 2.5% core inflation, 28-year high, and all of a sudden you see the bond market falling and yields spiking, your policy's right in the trash can and you're going to be forced to raise rates. You go to 2.5% and the bond market's completely fine with it, then you're completely fine with it too. The markets are going to be running these policies, and that's been more and more the case, never more so than the fourth quarter of 2018.
Danielle, can you reconcile that statistic, about the small businesses with what we see reported as the small business optimism? We see that number just be really elevated, the optimism is, and it just doesn't reconcile with the composition of small business.
Yeah, the paychecks with an X, I pay a lot more closely attention to that index than I do to the NFIB, because the NFIB will turn very negative on January 20th. So it's
paychecks, you say, Paychex?
PHX. They've got a small business employment index. It's got a nice history. And I follow them a lot more closely than I do the NFIB these days.
Why do you say it will turn negative January 20th?
Because the NFIB is extremely political, extremely partisan.
Oh, really?
So the data
it's a bunch of Republicans.
Yeah, very right.
Uh-huh. I never knew that.
I never really saw it take a hit with COVID, even though the small business sector's been gutted. You're like, where's the disconnect here?
29% of the small businesses that were open year-end 2019 are shut. 29%.
So I'll give you another fun fact about economic statistics. If Ed is back, hopefully he can hear this. He mentioned, the very strong ISM this morning. ISM basically surveys everybody who signs up to be a member. I think it's $200 to be a basic member of the organization, and you too can fill out a survey. After the financial crisis, they lost 40% of their membership. So to augment their survey, they also ISM also sponsors a lot of logistics courses at universities. So up to 20% of the survey could be college students that are studying logistics. And I was joking today that when the ISM hit 60, I said, if I told you it was Michigan State University seniors studying logistics are optimistic on the economy, stock market pops, would you have the same view of it as if I said ISM optimistic on the economy, stock market pops? Because it's essentially the same thing.
It is.
There's a lot of college students that are being surveyed in that now that are studying logistics.
And Jim, you were the first person a decade ago to tell me, careful of the ISM. And it wasn't until market with an I started becoming more prominent, which is C-suite occupants. So they're actual decision makers as opposed to purchasing managers who aren't in charge of hiring and firing. So it's a much different prism. So and market with the IT, you can compare and contrast across the globe.
Well, the chief economist at ISM used to be a guy named Norbert Orr. I think he left around 2010 or 11, and he just blasted the surveys on his way out the door, saying that they were kind of useless. He went over to market, helped them start their surveys.